Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're just playing a little bit of music right now, and then we'll get started in a couple of minutes. So take a moment to settle in, get some water, and we will get started with our two panelists here in a moment. Hi, folks. If you've just joined us, just listening to a little bit of music for a moment, and we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes as we let people trickle in. All right, because I want to have a lot of time for our two wonderful panelists today, I think we'll get started. Though I'm sure that folks might trickle in as they're coming from other meetings, et cetera, from the day. So hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to our nth time that we've run this Let's Talk Leadership event in the series that we've been hosting for just over 2 years now. I'm so pleased to welcome all of you folks who are both watching live and those who will be watching the recording afterwards for this panel conversation with Ashoke Mohanraj and Alice Irene Whittaker. Unfortunately, Samuel Marty can't be with us today, but we send our best wishes to him as he does some good work in his community of Frog Lake First Nation. So today we're going to be talking about storytelling and specifically how we can lead climate action through storytelling. This feels like a really important topic as we think about the ways that our world is completely changing. How we show up to things feels more important than ever to feel inspired by stories. I'm sure that we all can think of a time when a story, whether in a book, a piece of media, a film, or a story shared by a family member or a community member, changed the way that we think about things, imagine things, gave us inspiration, gave us that momentum to move forward. I know myself, I can think of many times in my life where story has changed things for me. And so that's what we want to talk about today with Ashoke and Alice Irene about the power of storytelling specifically for climate action. And so we'll get into a little bit of housekeeping here for the first couple of minutes. So I want to say a big thank you to our funders, North Family Foundation and Trottier Family Foundation, for supporting us to run this event today. I'd also like to take a moment for a land acknowledgement. So I know that we're calling in from places across the country of Canada, perhaps outside of Canada. And so I'm calling in from the River watershed here in Ontario, which is just outside of Toronto. The Credit River watershed is on Treaty 13 territory, which is the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and is also part of the treaty lands of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. This is a beautiful place that I get to call home, that I get to work in. And so I invite you all, as we talk about story today, to consider your own connection to the story of the land that you live on now, that you grew up on, and your relationship to the peoples of that land. And so I also just want to give a moment to talk about ASI, the organization that hosts this event today. So I'm Taylor and the program manager at ASI, and our organization is a Canadian charity that helps people and organizations to lead on climate action through education and engagement. Our motivation is to empower folks to be able to be climate leaders in whatever space they show up in, so that together we can shape this future where sustainability is at the heart of all decision making. We run our programming through 4 different sort of buckets or categories. We've got events like this today, and we also have leadership courses for folks to learn deeper about how they can lead climate action. We have a members network where people can connect with other folks across Canada to lead deeper and differently. We have custom engagements where we work with individuals and organizations to help them shape change. And we also have research on climate action workforce development. So if you're interested in any of our other programming, I invite you to check us out. But without further ado, I'd like to move us on into this event today. So once we wrap up some of the additional housekeeping pieces, I'll have our wonderful speakers introduce themselves. We'll have a bit of a panel discussion, and then we'll close out the event. So hopefully this is a great way for you folks to spend the next 55 minutes of your day. So thank you again for taking the time to join us. And just one small other piece of housekeeping before we dive in. We will not be taking questions during this event, so just to set some expectations there. This is not a webinar style Zoom, so we do ask kindly that you remain muted during the event so we can put our focus on our speakers today. You're welcome to have your cameras on and change the view in Zoom if you'd like to see other folks on screen today, but we will have myself and the speakers spotlighted throughout the event. And feel welcome to engage in the chat. We can't promise that we'll answer every comment or question that you have, especially for the speakers who are going to try their best to be present in our conversation. And I also ask that you be respectful and lead with curiosity if you do engage in the chat. And so without further ado, I'd like to dive in with Ashoke and Alice Irene. Alice Irene Whittaker is an author and environmental communications consultant, and Ashoke Mohanraj is a legal and regulatory lead, as well as a children's author. And so, because I can't possibly do justice to both of these two wonderful people, I would like to have them introduce themselves and share a bit about their story. Alice Irene, if you would do us the honor of introducing yourself first, with your name, where you're calling in from, a bit about your work, perhaps in the past and what you do now, and then a little bit about how storytelling intersects with your journey in climate action and sustainability.
Thanks so much, Taylor, and hello to everyone. It's great to be here, so thanks for having me. I am, as Taylor mentioned, I'm an author. So my first book, my debut, came out last year, and it's called Homing: A Quest to Care for Ourselves and the Earth. And also, I'm a podcaster. So I have a podcast called Reseed, Repairing Our Relationship with Nature and Each Other, and explores very interconnected themes, really, of how do we care for the earth, be stewards of nature, take climate action. If we're burning ourselves out, how do we do that if we're doing it in a way that embraces perfectionism and the harms of the past when we're trying to do better? And that really looking at taking care of starting with ourselves and each other and community as part of that work. So I take a really journalistic approach, creative nonfiction approach in my writing, in my podcasting, deep research, deep interview, and I'm can talk more about that. I'm calling in from Chelsea, Quebec. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm on the unceded land of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe, unceded land. And I create here. This room is where I make stories, create stories, and I'm also an environmental communications leader. So the last 15 years, I've led teams in development work or communications work, both first in gender equity, but over the last 7 or 8 years in the environmental space. So that is a different form of storytelling, more direct communications, but there's so much interplay between those and the part of my brain that likes to really dive deep into technical subjects, and then the part of me that is a heart-led communicator, storyteller who wants to lead with emotion and the human experience of living at this moment. In that work, I work for a range of different clients, and that work I look at things like nature finance or clean economy and communicate with everyone from voters, regular people to policymakers and other sort of influential decision makers. So they're totally different languages between when I'm communicating and storytelling, but the same issues at the end of the day. I'm also a mother of three children, and that plays a huge part in my life and who I am and how I come to storytelling as well. And I like this question of how it interconnected with my journey. Like I mentioned, I'm a strategic communicator, and I always sort of separated that part and the professional part with my writing. But I've like many humans, many people here, maybe I've been a writer long before I ever called myself a capital W writer and have been writing for my entire life. I used to travel solo all around the world to different continents and countries, and I would just sit and write. It's like writing in a cafe, writing on a plane, writing here, writing there. Like that's what calls to me. And so I have always been a writer and separated that, kept it sort of private. And it was when I moved out here to the woods and sort of started listening to my intuition for the first time instead of going from a people pleasing place all the time that I said, oh, no, I actually want to write that book that I've been dreaming of and be a writer and tell people I'm a writer before anyone else asked for it or wanted to give that label to me. So my journey started with doing it late at night, early in the morning, on my vacations from work, and that's still when I do most of my storytelling. And I've started with publishing essays and smaller pieces, and then while I was working on my book, and that led me to the podcast too. And I'll get to this later maybe, but I found that when I was interviewing all these people, farmers in their barns, or an economist here, or sustainable fashion designer, whomever it was, that I loved these interviews so much and these conversations with people and wanted to share them without the gatekeeping and long process of writing. And that's what started podcasting into a totally different medium for telling those stories. So my journey is just starting, I feel, as a writer and storyteller. And yeah, I'm interested in talking more today about my approach, which, as I mentioned, is more sort of journalistic writing, but then with a poetic narrative style.
I really love that, Alice Irene. Hopefully, we get to hear more about this journalistic approach with a bit of poetry mixed in there. But Ashok, over to you to hear a bit about who you are, the work that you do, and how that connects to storytelling.
Yeah, hey folks, happy Wednesday. As mentioned, my name is Ashoke. You guys can call me Ash, like the Pokemon trainer. Again, storytelling, Pokemon, storytelling, all that stuff. But anyways, I'm calling in from Halifax, or the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And so I guess I wear a lot of different hats. I'm a trained environmental scientist. I went to the University of Waterloo, studied environmental science. And then after graduation, I worked as an environmental advisor for the RCMP, doing a lot of impact assessment work. So things like federal projects on federal lands, testing how, ammunitions and different explosives would impact water and soil. A lot of different stuff. We did a lot of stuff on like how, the RCMP's horse poop would impact the city of Ottawa's water quality. Very interesting stuff. And then I kind of knew that wasn't for me, so I kind of decided to go to law school, and I'm currently specializing in marine and environmental law. But somewhere in between that, somewhere along the way, I kind of got interested in storytelling. By no means did I ever intend to be a writer or a storyteller. It kind of just happened, spontaneously. And honestly, I attribute a lot of it to COVID and the pandemic, because during that time, I think like most of us, I had an existential crisis about what I actually wanted to do in my life. And so honestly, my journey of storytelling and writing came more so, this might sound controversial, but less from passion, but more so from frustration. There were a lot of issues that I guess weren't being covered, or issues that I wanted to explore. And I'm like, storytelling might be a good way to do that. And also during the pandemic, I think writing was really almost therapeutic, and it helped me get my thoughts down. And so in my stories and in my storytelling and my advocacy work, there's kind of three themes that I kind of try to bring to light. One is diversity and the sustainability space, bringing more diverse actors, both gender, disabilities, all that kind of stuff to climate space and climate work. Another one is bridging the gap between environmentalism and masculinity. I can touch on that a little bit more as we go on through this conversation. And then the last one, which I think is the most important to me, is kind of a paradigm shift in how we see advocacy, which is, how do we show people that caring is cool? Because a lot of times people think that caring is kind of cringe or these advocates are too radical or like, stuff like that. So a lot of my storytelling is how do we create positive role models that show people, standing up for things that you believe in is one of the coolest things that you can do, right? And so again, to that question about how does that intersect with the work that I'm doing right now, I work as a legal and regulatory advisor for a startup in North Carolina. It's called Argonetta, and we actually build underwater homes for divers essentially. So very, very different worlds. And I guess the connection between storytelling and legal work specifically is it all comes down to my philosophy is an idea is only as good as you can communicate it, whether that's in telling a children's books or whether you're in front of a judge or a jury, right? Because no matter how good your facts are or how well they're in your favor, it's not just about those facts, it's how well you present those facts and how you can persuade someone or convince someone of your case. So I always say like it doesn't matter, even in a sense of climate change or stuff like that. You might have the science on your side, you might have all the information behind you, you might have all the statistics, right? But in order to get people to change and convince people to kind of get on your side per se, you need to provide them with a compelling story. I think that's where the connection between storytelling and science all comes together in order to show people, it's not just about facts and figures, it's about how do we tell the stories that really matter and how do we get people to really just come back to that fundamental sense of connection between each other.
Thank you, Ashok. I really like that you brought up this connection to like the human-centered side of storytelling and how facts and data are great, but don't necessarily move us to act, don't necessarily move our hearts. Which moves me very perfectly into my question for you, Alice Irene. Um, so across journalism and poetry and podcasting, you have these themes of care, connection, and justice rooted in your work. And in your book Homing and across all of your projects, you invite people to slow down, to reflect and reconnect with the natural world and each other. And so, in all of that, I just wonder what brings you back to storytelling time and time again, or communications and storytelling. What brings you back to telling that story in these different ways, and how do you think that helps us to process or reshape our relationships with the world around us?
Stories help us understand the world around us and also within us too. So understanding like, the change that we're feeling or fear or our deepest desires or whatever's going on inside of us, but then also externally with this, uncontrollable world outside and forces that are affecting us. And telling stories helps us to know where to put our attention. Like that's what we pay attention to is what we care about. And stories can help us say this is important, or you care about this, or this matters, and draw our attention to that for better or worse. Like that can be used in many different ways. And for me, the reason I keep going back to storytelling is that like that's how I feel and that's how I express. So when I sit down to write, even if I like if it's personal writing, it will come out in a way that is narrative or expressive or poetic, and that's what is right for me that wouldn't be right for someone else. It's not always right for every project, but if finding our authentic voice is really important, and saying, well, this is how I am. Like and that's going to be different for someone is just innately hilarious, and that for them is going to come out in a different way and find different audiences that it's going to resonate with as well. For me, like I say, really care deeply about the science and the facts, like we were talking about there briefly. And so I start with research, like deep research, and that's books, that's everything I can get my hands on, reports, and then find that that one thread leads me to the next. So you learn about one thing, and all of a sudden my interest is peaked. Like I have a brain that really sees connections or goes on tangents, for better or worse. And for me, I feel like it's better because you keep learning about new things. So I follow that thread, get to know as much as I can, and then there's far too much to use in a story. And that's when I start to interconnect it with my own life or my own story, or something that it doesn't need to be my story, but someone's human story that has nothing to do with that research. So an example would be, I did a lot of reading about fiber sheds, which I'm in love with, which some people may know about, but it's sort of like if you think about farm to table food, but for fibers for the clothing that we wear. So it's really interconnected with farming practices, with carbon sequestration in the soil, with local supply chains and local resilience. There's a gender component to it, justice component, and a creativity component too, like remembering ways to create clothing, for example. And so for that, I would learn everything, read all the books about here's what it means for soil, here's the science behind it, get to know it, and then go and see a local farmer and meet her sheep and understand about her life, like her ancestry and her story that brought her there, and then reflect on, oh wait, that connected to my childhood in terms of this quilt that came up with me. And then I'd put together a chapter that weaves those things together, starting on the farm with the shepherd, talking about the quilt, and then moving into this very niche area of the environmental world. And for me, why that matters and helps me make sense of the world is that it brings something that people might turn off or they might not be interested, and I turn it into like, this is something personal and something that I care about deeply, and hopefully the reader cares about deeply. And I know that there'll be a number of people that don't care about that, and that's fine. That's great. That's the beauty of stories, is that they're for certain, like for people who are going to deeply resonate with them. And then other people that might say this is too lyrical or whatever it is for them, they can find other stories that resonate with them. So I do really like this reported approach, and have also experimented with it when it is less personal, but still that idea of taking a flood, that happened in our area, a state of emergency, and then using that flood and the terror and the feeling of climate impacts right at your doorstep as a story to talk about flood maps and to talk about adaptation measures and decisions that are being made, and flooding causes, and all the ways that we can protect ourselves, and community resilience. How do we memorialize what's lost in a big weather event like flooding, and how do we connect with our community? So those themes that are so important to me, but people might turn off at flood maps. I like to weave it into the story of the flood to make it urgent and to help make sense of this thing that happened in our lives and in our community. So yeah, I don't know if you have any follow-ups on that. I'm just checking my notes. Oh, I did have something I really wanted to touch on here, which is the responsibility of a storyteller, because like I said, any storyteller, so when someone's making a film, you're looking at it through their eyes and their edit, and you're seeing what is important to that storyteller, and there is potential there to manipulate how people feel or what they care about. And as climate storytellers, there's a lot of power that you have over whoever's consuming the media, the graphic novel, the film, the piece of music. And we all go through waves of hopelessness in this work, I believe. And so it's hard to know, but there's also, blind, empty hope, which is, arguably even more harmful. So it's how do you find ways to balance that and to not, for example, push your readers or your listeners into hopelessness if that's how you're feeling at a certain time, but also being authentic to the dire realities that we face. So that's something that I grapple with a lot, is understanding as a storyteller that you are shaping the way people see the world and what they feel. And that if you're doing climate storytelling, likely you're speaking with people that really care, and people who already know a lot of the facts and certainly enough of the facts to care and take action. And so understanding that that's the most vulnerable group to turn into hopelessness, because if the people who care the most and are doing the most feel like, oh, it doesn't matter what the actions I'm taking because this person I respect or read or look to is saying it doesn't matter, and then that can potentially turn off all of this power, personal power that people have. So balancing that is a big responsibility of the storyteller.
Yeah, I really like that you shared that responsibility of the storyteller because you talk about how exciting it can be to hear all of these stories, like whether that's, reading data or maps or going to talk to people. And so collecting all of these stories to coalesce them into a story that you're gifting to people, but then sort of balancing this responsibility of yourself as a storyteller with your own authenticity. And that knowing you're, like you said, you're speaking to a very specific audience. And if that doesn't resonate, that doesn't resonate. But then also having that in the back of your mind that there is that responsibility, especially in the climate space, to not turn people off of action. And maybe just a quick follow-up question for you, Alice Irene. Is there a way that you find is helpful to practice that, to balance those two things, your authenticity with that sense of responsibility?
I look to what I'm like afraid to say or be. So if it's, and I think as storytellers to look at like, okay, why do I not want to talk about a certain topic, or why do I not want to be vulnerable? And I found that in a lot of climate spaces where you're at things are very polished and put together, and you're like, are other people as upset as I am? Like they're, and of course people are, and we can't just go around being upset all the time because we need to keep moving. But I've oh, where was I going to start with that? But yeah, looking at like, oh, I'm afraid to be vulnerable, to show that I really care about this. It's like, well, maybe for me, that was finding out in my first book. That's what I need to write the most about, is care. Like it feels too soft, but then the more I learned about it and how radical it is, and that it has teeth and it can be very powerful, and that regardless of that, it's what I need to learn to do for myself is take care of myself, that I haven't been very good at. So it's like exploring that fear or why I don't want to talk about that, and then moving into that and being like, oh, this is something that is an offering that is maybe not being covered, and that might be a source of, if not hope, it might be a source of just, oh, I see myself in that. I care too and feel like I care too much. And so for people to be able to find that kind of solidarity or solace in that. So it might not be hope, but it's at least community. And another piece on exploring it was learning from others. Like there's so many incredible storytellers, writers, researchers that are out there that we can learn from. And so I did a lot of in my own writing about hope, reading and learning about, active hope from Joanna Macy, or the poet Drew Lanham, who I got to speak with, who's incredible, talking about, hope, first your heart needs to break and like land somewhere, and then you keep taking action from that place. Or Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson has great writing about hope and turning it into active practices as well that are tailored to your specific talents and your specific interests and privileges. And so learning from others about hope in a way that's really meaningful, and not like just feel better about things, but actually like, oh, it's a practice, not a destination kind of piece, is that, we can learn from others. So at least if you are writing about hopelessness or feel hopeless, you are equipped with some of the information and thinking that brilliant people have already done.
Mm, that's really powerful. Thank you, Alice Irene. And I really like that you talked about this idea of how can we just share that we care about things. And sometimes that can feel really uncomfortable when there's not that space or no one else is talking about it. But to be even the first person to speak up, or the first person to say something, or maybe to try and find those other people that feel that too. I know, thinking back to myself at a younger age, being in those climate spaces and just having someone else to say, does this break your heart too? I think feels just really reassuring that you're not alone in that, and then to move forward from that. And I think this leads me really nicely into a question for you, Ashok. Um, Talking about caring is cool and sort of the fear about being cringe, or that like caring is a weird thing to do. It's not cool to look like you care about something, especially the planet. So yeah, I want to ask you a quick question about what does that look like for you to focus on that message that caring is cool, and to authentically be yourself and to lean into those parts of you that perhaps aren't maybe as loudly accepted.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a really, I guess, unique way of the way that I frame it, especially because I feel like obviously it sounds very simple, right? But I think it's very powerful. And I'll go back to like university days, for example. Like I went to the University of Waterloo, very engineering centric school, right? And I was studying environmental science, right? And it's gonna sound funny, but like, I would go to like parties and I would tell people, oh, I'm majoring in environmental science. They're like, oh, what do you do? ID birds and trees, and they kind of like make fun of me for it, right? And I'm like, yeah, I do that, but like it's also cooler cooler than it seems, right? I just felt like people who were doing the work on the ground and actually doing like real conservation work and actually trying to solve the issues that, were extremely important weren't getting, I guess, the respect. They weren't getting the flowers, right? And I think we kind of glamorize other industries, like we glamorize, ESG, we glamorize engineering, we glamorize all that kind of stuff, but no one really glamorizes the more, I guess, compassionate, more sensitive work. For example, the intersection between human rights and environmental rights, right? No one really talks about that and how that stuff is extremely important. And so again, this kind of ties in with the whole masculinity piece, right? Growing up, in Toronto, right? And no dude is boasting about, going out and planting trees and, IDing wildflowers, right? Because it wasn't seen as cool, right? And so and there's actually studies that support this, but a lot of studies will show that men refrain from partaking in eco-friendly activities because it's seen as feminine, right? Like if you compare, I don't know the exact, statistics on this, but if you compare the amount of men versus women who carry around reusable water bottles and tote bags, I'm sure you'll find a stark difference, right? And it's because I think the way that we've kind of set up society or their narrative around how or like who is supposed to be in positions of more compassionate roles. And for me, it's like how do we get young boys to kind of, steer away from that traditional narrative and be like, hey, like I think chasing butterflies and, learning about wildflowers is very cool. I think it's also extremely important, right? The fact that, young men aren't participating in these things it not only creates polarization, but it creates this disinterest. And I feel that it causes a whole lot of other issues. And so I think that's why showing people that caring is cool is so important because it truly is. Being able to stand up for what you believe in and not really care about what anyone else thinks about you, I think is extremely powerful, not only for the cause that you're fighting for, but like at a personal level as well. Being able to know that, you're on almost like the right side of history. Not, but I think for me at least it's super important. I think it's an important message to relay to kids, especially when when things like eco anxiety and mental health are at our all-time high.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that and for just the message that you spread through your children's books and through your work, Ashok. I think that positive masculinity and environmentalism is so critical. And I see it time and time again in the spaces that I show up to in the climate space. So many of them are dominated by women and non-binary folks, which is fabulous. And there's so much strength and power in that. But at the same time, I've heard the question of where are all the men?
Hmm.
And I think that there's that space for men to show up in that as well, in a way that they could see the power in that in the compassion.
Yeah, exactly. And the to that point, like the point isn't for men to take up space. We don't need that. It's just more how do we get everyone to be part of the table and be part of the conversation. I think it's super important because again, diversity is our strength, especially when it comes to, communicating the climate crisis. Not only, from a gender perspective, but like from a geographical perspective, right? The global south, right? How do we incorporate, those perspectives as well, right? I think it's super important to not only, have an open table, but encourage different actors to be part of that table and that conversation.
Hmm. Yeah, of course. Yeah, talking about diversity, I think we do need everyone at the table to be able to bring those different perspectives to actually move forward together. We do all live on this planet. We'll have to continue doing that. So how can we all share those perspectives? And I'd like to talk a little bit more about sort of these two worlds you find yourself in as an author for children's stories and in the legal space. Can you say a little bit more about whether in the courtroom or crafting stories for kids, how do you use storytelling to spark change? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. And like again, I don't, I've never claimed to, be a storyteller at heart. I kind of just fell into this and I think at heart everyone is a storyteller though, right? I think we all I think it's part of human nature to crave stories. It's gonna bother me that I can't remember this, but I remember seeing it somewhere. I think it was like a YouTube ad. I'm not even kidding. But it was a quote. It's like when kids are born, they look for three things, right? The first two is love and safety. And then once they have those two things, they say, Mom, Dad, tell me a story, right? Because that's essentially that's always what happens. A kid will seek love and shelter, right? And then once it has those two things, the next thing it wants is human connection that comes through storytelling, right? And so I think at a fundamental level, that's kind of all we want. And like life is just a series of stories in a series of rooms, right? And then kind of storytelling is fundamental to that. And I think the key piece about storytelling is that it evokes like emotions, right? Like in a way that facts and figures can't, right? And just as an example of that, if I ask you to remember the last article you read, it might be harder to remember that than the last, TV show you binged on Netflix, right? Because those stories and those things that you watch are a lot easier to remember because they invoke a certain emotion, right? So I think that's kind of how I use storytelling. It's less about how do we, say, oh, climate change is real or global temperatures are increasing. It's how do we convey emotions of what that actually means? How does that make us, like you mentioned, Taylor, like how does that make you feel, about the world around us and how you kind of convey that rather than the facts and figure because, again, facts and figures are important. That's a real science that's happening and people need to be aware of those things. But it doesn't mean anything unless you can actually convince people as to why that matters to them, not only personally, but at a global scale as well. And you know, my books are children's books, and the first one's called Pollinator Man, second one's called Dolphin Dude, and they're kind of sustainability heroes. And that was intentional. The reason why I did that is because who doesn't like a superhero, right? If you look at the past few years, Marvel has been milking the entire. They've released a show every 6 months, right? It's because people love superheroes, right? And if you look at a young person, a young 4 to 5 year old, they idolize these superheroes. They have them on their lunchbox, their backpacks, right? And so if we can create positive role models, sustainability superheroes who are showing people, being compassionate is cool, being compassionate is masculine and strong and all that kind of stuff, they're more likely to be engaged with that kind of work. Um, and I guess, bringing it back to the legal world in a sense, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, you can have all the facts on your side, right? But if you don't, say your case in a compelling way, it doesn't really matter. And this might be controversial. Some people might call me a bad lawyer for saying this, but I think, yes, it's important to be right. Obviously, you want to be right in terms of in the eyes of the law, right? But I think arguably what's just as important is being reasonable, right? And so we do this in story and like at least in my storytelling, like one thing that we're doing in Dolphin Dude, we're turning Dolphin Dude into an animated series. And like the one thing that we're trying to grapple with is how do we kind of make this reasonable and realistic? Like, for example, plastic straws versus paper straws. Everyone hates paper straws. Like we can all admit that, right? They kind of suck, right? But like I can't make an animated film in good faith and be like, oh, plastic straws, they feel weird in your mouth, right? It's not something I can do. So how do you find that balance of like communicating, yes, there's an issue, yes, there's a solution. That solution isn't perfect. How do we meet in the middle, right? Because it's all about compromise at the end of the day. And I think that's the challenging part with storytelling. It's like how you convey, all the nuance, right? Especially in an issue like this where there is so much nuance. It's never black and white. There's just so much gray area. But I think storytelling is in my opinion is the best way to kind of communicate, those feelings and try to get people to kind of, connect with the cause at a personal level.
I like that you shared that. I also agree. Paper straws are not the best solution. I don't know if anyone's ever had an ice cap with a paper straw, but it's terrible. But yeah, I totally hear you on trying to be reasonable as well, or being more realistic, so that people don't sort of hear your message too and say, "Well, but that doesn't feel true to me. That's a really annoying or awful thing for me to do. I don't really like this message at all." And so I just really like that you've shared that, Ashok. So thank you. Um, and so, a question to both of you. I'd like to bring both of you into conversation to talk about what types of climate stories need to be told more often or told differently. I think that, if you if you're brave enough to go on Instagram these days, I think we're inundated with the same sort of narratives. Oftentimes, the narratives that get the most headlines are those that are doom and gloom, those that are talking about just trying to make the future maybe like incrementally better and perhaps not thinking bigger, thinking different, thinking more systemically about what type of change we want to see for the world. What type of world do we want to live in? And so I'm curious to hear from both of you, perhaps Alice, Irene, if you'd like to go first. What types of climate stories do you think need to be told more often, or how can we shake things up from what we're doing currently?
I think what we most need is that climate and environment and nature stories are interwoven into all other stories so that they're not explicitly environmental in the way that it's like, oh, here's environmental storytelling for environmental people who are already engaged. But how do we build it into, and not, and by we, I mean people and storytellers, not environmental folks, to build it into the regular films that we're seeing and the podcasts we're listening to and the books we're reading and all the rest. So seeing it more as part of like life, you know, like climate is life, nature is life, and how to see it as part of our regular lives and not a separate agenda item that goes up and down in our attention and in how important it is politically and everything based on the other issues, but rather that it is like the fabric of our world. And so how to build it into non-environmental spaces and non-environmental storytelling. Perhaps related, I think humor and like any comedy around it, which is like the number one thing I like to consume. So how can it be funny and how can it be light sometimes and irreverent? Like maybe there's something there in the straws, you know, like just making it like real and funny for people and something to engage with. Like you said, like even just the way you phrased that question of if you're brave enough to go on Instagram, you know, like a lot of times there think so much coming at us that you just at us, you know, want to turn away, and that having it be something that people want to come towards instead of turn away from. I think humor can play a powerful role in that. And I'll add one more, which is, as I mentioned, and probably no surprise, what I want to see more of is when the science and the journalism comes together with storytelling, with beautiful prose, with, you know, emotional music. Like Weather Station, I love Weather Station, and her climate album was incredibly successful, but it doesn't feel like hit you over the head. Like it really just draws you in. It's one of my favorite albums. So I love when those worlds come together, and I think that's tricky because we like things being simple and we like things like this is science and you never talk about it that way, and this is art, and you know they shouldn't come together, and you know, back to Ashoke's point about nuance as well, that's where those worlds come together. They can help with that nuance, and an example I'll use is in my book I had a chapter on wildness and wilderness and like the problematic legacy of some of the conservation heroes that we hold up, who were incredibly problematic, or this idea of wilderness erasing indigenous people who'd been there for time immemorial and continue to be. So how to talk about the things we love, like why the wilds or wilderness, but understanding how problematic they can be, like that kind of nuance in storytelling can be really hard to get right.
Oops. I like that both of you have brought up the nuance in storytelling, and that we don't live in a perfect world, and that there is the problematic or historical piece of some of the stories that we share, and perhaps not shying away from that, but also speaking to sort of the positive side of the stories that we get to share as well, and how that can shape our world and help us to learn and help us to move forward. Alice, Irene, you shared so much in that I want to keep touching upon. But Ashok, any other stories from you that you would like to see told differently, or new stories that we could tell?
Yeah, I really resonate with what Alice Irene had mentioned. I kind of agree with those ones as well. I think the key one I think is making it fun, like you mentioned, Alice. Like I think like for me when I'm telling stories or like doing the work with Dolphin Dude or Pollinator Man, some of my inspirations are like Bill Nye the Science Guy or like Zaboomafoo, right? And like you think about like the fun anthems and the fun themes and the memorable characters, right? I think that's kind of again what people remember and what they connect to. So I think, making it fun because this work it's hard, it's depressing, and sometimes, it's very, hostile, right? So I think the only way to sustain, being in a space this tough, I think, is to have fun with it because otherwise you just get burnt out and it's very hard to have kind of like even at dinner tables it's hard having conversations because you're always seen as the radical environmentalist, right? And sometimes it pisses me off, so like how do you kind of make it fun and a little bit more approachable? I mentioned this earlier, true, that like the gray areas, the nuance, right? Like how do you communicate those stories? And again, there's no like easy answer, and I think there's no it's very hard to communicate nuance, but I think it's super important to realize that it's I think we have to stop, this polarizing I'm right, you're wrong, you're left, you're right. Like I think it's more so like how do we stop debating and how we just have conversations and not, we all kind of how do we get to the common ground, right? How do we both agree? Like for example, the wildfires this summer, right? Like we all agree, like whether however whatever your stance is on climate change and whatnot, right? I think there's a universal understanding these wildfires are becoming more and more frequent, more and more common, more and more dangerous to human health, right? And I think that's something that everyone can get behind. I think to your to your actual question, what stories do we need more of? I think more of like how climate change or how sustainability impacts individuals at an individual level, because these issues are no longer abstract or they're only affecting the global south anymore. I think if you have this conversation 5-10 years ago, maybe that was the case, right? But now I think it's hitting home. It's in our own backyards, and I think that's going to start to wake people up a little bit. And I think, telling stories of local experiences and things like that. And I really wish, Samuel was here because I think one piece that's, that we need more attention on is Indigenous storytelling. Because the way that they kind of think about the relationship to nature and the land itself, I think is super important. And I think I remember hearing this one time, but essentially, you know, we're essentially relearning what we've unlearned, right? Indigenous, stewards have been, protectors of biodiversity for millennia, right? And we've kind of, through colonization, we've been told to forget them. We've introduced these new Western systems. And now we're kind of realizing, oh, they were right the entire time. So how do we kind of relearn, their teachings and their traditions in order to protect biodiversity and things like that? So I think Indigenous storytelling, I think, should be at the forefront. And like also just like being able to integrate all of those things and weaving them together to get a holistic sense of, different perspectives. But yeah, there's a whole list of things I could talk about, but I think just being able to acknowledge that, everyone has a different story, everyone has a different perspective. Storytelling is not about being right. It's about how can I share what I feel right now and how does that potentially resonate with another human being?
I'd love to follow up. I love that about the not being right. And I think one of the things we most need in storytelling is stories of imperfection, like imperfect environmental action, imperfect climate action, people that feel like they don't have answers, stories, like in climate stories that are not about consumption, like are not about people who have money and means to purchase certain things, but the whole spectrum of what climate action and climate experience can look like without it being perfect, because that's been one of the major pitfalls of environmental storytelling has been this is what it looks like to be an environmentalist, or this is what climate action looks like, and you are good if you do it and you're bad if you're not. And that has been so devastating to the movement. And either people feel like environmental and climate conversation is pious or righteous, or just feel guilt, like, oh, I'm going to do it wrong anyways, or it's so intimidating, or this is like humorless and gonna, yeah, I'm not for me. So finding ways to embrace imperfection and be like, yeah, it's fine if you do XYZ, like it's fine, like we're doing our best, and different people are going to have a different experience of how they relate to climate and what they do about it, and for it to be an open door for people to come in regardless of what their consumption habits are.
I think that's something that both of you have touched on that feels really important is the role in both of your very different contexts of helping people see themselves in the story. So helping people see themselves as an actual character in their own story, in our story together. Um, feels really critical, whether that's helping them to find the joy and the humor and the levity in things. I look at people like Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and her Climate Road show this last summer, who brought in like musicians and comedians and like just people to make it to make it fun and enjoyable. I also look at Yellow Dot Studios, who tends to go on that side of more like humor and levity to talk about climate. But also, yeah, Ashok, like all your work talking about how can we help people see their role in climate or see that caring is cool, or to see themselves in this effort as well. So perhaps there's also maybe one of the stories that we need to tell is that people can be part of this, even if they feel as though they've been left out of the story for far too long. And with that, we're 10 minutes to the top of the hour already. I feel like we could talk about this forever, but I'd love to just hear one final response from both of you on the question around what's a piece of advice that you have for climate champions who are looking to enhance their impact through storytelling? Maybe what would you tell a younger version of yourself, or someone who is maybe a bit fearful of bringing story into their work?
Do you want to go first this time, Ashok, or
Yeah,
me?
sure, I can start. I think for me, my closing thoughts would be this might sound, I guess, again, a little contra. I'm a pretty controversial guy. I say things that are very contradictory, but I think when it comes to storytelling, obviously, like yes, we want to tell altruistic stories and share good in the world. But I think sometimes storytelling can be a little bit selfish. I think what I mean by that is like don't be afraid to use your own lived experiences to to share what you feel, right? And it's really funny. I see my old boss in the call, Roya. I used to be her co-op student, and it was a job that I wasn't very good at. It was a very engineering centric job. I wasn't very good at it, but that job really, it helped me figure out what I wanted to do. And that was kind of, allowed me to kind of learn more about, specific things. And that's kind of what kind of jump started me to write my first book because I realized what I was good at and what I wasn't good at. Right. I think, going through different experiences, it allows you to shape, it gives you perspective and allows you to, those experiences shape you and who you are. And I think don't be afraid to play on that. Like when I first started, talking about, the bridge between environmentalism and masculinity. I didn't think anyone else would get that. I was just, I thought I was the only one, right? Because it's a very niche thing, right? I've never heard anyone else talk about it, right? But then when I started to talk about it publicly, then I started getting, dudes starting to reach out like, oh yeah, like I totally felt this way, thank you for sharing that publicly. Like I really acknowledge that you've shared that and like it's important to talk about. So I think, deep down inside, you might not think that your message, resonates with someone. You think it might be extremely personal. But I guarantee you there's probably at least one or two other people who have felt that shame, that same lived experience, and I think will resonate with your story. Um, so I think that's what I would say.
Thank you, Ashok.
I love that, and I'm fascinated by it, and think it's so great that you're working on that niche part of things. I'm excited to introduce my sons and my daughter to Dolphin Dude. So I'll say two, if I may, because I couldn't decide between them. And one was with storytelling like, precision. So like having it doesn't need to be a story for everyone that captures everything and is a great story for all time. It needs to be precise, and that's in the structure when you're like putting it together. It's in the medium, like what's the thing that is best for this. It's in the language, and it's most importantly in the audience, like being really, really precise about who this is for, and that it finding those people, connecting with those people however you can and getting it to them. And then others may or may not like it, and that's fine. There are so many stories and other places to go. So being really precise is really important, and that's what makes a story sharp and unique and like, oh, I've never heard this before, is when it is that precise. So that would be the one. And in the research and the facts too, like making it pointy with all of that is something I care about, and would advise myself for sure when I was starting writing as well, especially around audience. Like I thought, well, I'm writing about the economy, and I'm writing about food and clothing, like this is for everyone because we all interact with those things and it's not for everyone ever. And so finding a very precise, the most specific, like down to a person audience is really key. And then the other more important one is just to like create the story and then express it and share it and not wait for someone to say that it's time or that you're ready. I'm not saying just throw every old thing out there, but like actually writing something, creating it because you want to, and then going routes that don't have gatekeepers so while you're developing your voice, while you're finding your audience, while you're exploring the way you want to tell stories. So that can be podcasts, that's social media, like there's so many, but like self-publishing, there's so many ways to work on something and share it and express it that really get those stories out there. And that at the end of the day is what is so powerful and so important, is to find it in yourself, to express it, and to work those skills and then share it with other human beings. And we're all human beings right now, sort of navigating this very rocky, turbulent world, politically and in our personal lives and public lives. And so just finding those stories and sharing them with people and just doing it, and then working up to a bigger story or a bigger dream by accumulating all of that experience.
Thank you so much, Alice Irene. And I want to go back to something that you said at the very beginning of the call, because I feel like both of you have done this really well. Not waiting for permission from someone or something to tell you when is the right time to share your story. I think that both of you are a real testament to just sharing your story and putting your words out there, putting yourself out there. And it sounds like both of you have seen the really positive impact from that in the community that you've been able to connect with, the people that have been able to resonate with that. So, on behalf of everyone who has resonated with your stories, thank you for being storytellers, whether or not you found yourself there from a young age or sort of fell into this by accident. But as one of you said, perhaps not by accident, perhaps we're all storytellers at heart as humans just trying to make sense of the world. So thank you so much to both of you for this lovely conversation that I wish we could just have for the next several hours, at least. But with that, we're coming to the end of our event. Um, I would just like to mention a couple of few things before we close out today. I wanted to share that ASI has launched a campaign recently called Lead It Forward. And so, sort of in this spirit of supporting those who are doing fabulous work and paying it forward, we're celebrating the leadership journeys for others to help lead on climate action. And so, as part of the Lead It Forward campaign, we're doing a coffee giveaway. So if you love coffee, as I do, and I know many of us who are working long days and nights on climate action do, check out our LinkedIn. All we need you to do to enter in this coffee giveaway for local coffee is to tag a leader that has inspired you on our LinkedIn post and enter a short form. And you can win coffee for yourself and the leader that you tag if you'd like to share that with them. And if you like this conversation today, next up in November, on November 5th, we've got another one of these Let's Talk leadership events. We'll be focusing on climate action across generations. So this intergenerational conversation will feature Bob Willard, Desiree Maurice, and Abby Piazza in another conversation just like this one. So I hope you join us. We'll pop the link in the chat for this and all of our other ASI resources if you'd like to sign up. The best way to do that is to sign up for our newsletter so you can hear about this and other programming that we have upcoming so you never miss out on anything. And with that, I would like to thank you so much for taking this hour with us to spend this time listening to our wonderful speakers, Ashoke and Alice Irene, share their story on storytelling. And I hope that that resonated with you folks. I hope that you think back to the stories that have inspired you and have moved you through your life and feel encouraged to continue on your storytelling journey. And with that, thank you so much, folks. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your days, weeks, and I hope we see you again soon. And please share feedback on this event at the link in the chat. Thank you, folks. Take good care.